Took me a little longer to get my butt in gear today. That's Friday for you. Of course, it wouldn't be a stream if I didn't start with the ceremonial playing of my brother's album, so of course, let's get that started. Folks, half a second to stream in here. Hey Jay Whirl, first time having you on the stream, good to see you. Just realizing I still need to commit and push the update to Beam where you can send multiple files. Whoa. Folks are taking a little time to come in. I'm trying to decide whether or not I should just dive in. Hey CS, good to see you. Welcome back. So we're doing a little bit of database surgery today. We are gonna clean up the URL structure which we talked about on the last stream, but I'll outline exactly what's going on there. And then we're going to rework the indexing system so that it is able to function even whenever it's receiving updates from other servers or users that are storing their Hyper-Vs locally. And that's really the big piece of work to do today. And once that's in place, we should be able to implement stuff like notifications. I have implemented that kind of indexing process on the HyperStack like 4 times now. So So I got lots to pull from, but I gotta admit, it's my least favorite thing to implement. It's just a difficult process every time. So let's get into the URL structure. This is something we've gone back and forth on a couple of times. Basically, this is what our table layout looks like. It's a key value store, Hyper-B's are, and we're adding a kind of tables concept on top of it. And currently the way that's laid out looks like this, where you have a tables namespace, you declare your schemas, and then map it to an ID, and then that becomes that table. And the schemas are acting as identifiers for the table. Now that's fine, but Hyper-B's have a URL structure, and we want to switch to using the Hyper-B URLs. And the URL structure is to put it kind of broadly, it's like that. And the separators that we use between the different namespaces inside the key value table for what you would call subtables or subspaces, those are actually nulls. And in the URL scheme, a / gets translated to that separator. So in the current table layout or database layout, it would look something like this. Like a post, for instance, would be addressed in that fashion. And that's a pretty crappy URL. What I would rather have the URLs for posts look like is something more like this. So, the upside of having the URLs be addressed in that fashion is we gain this benefit of being able to look at the URLs and know what the nature of the content is, which is actually incredibly valuable. Because it's pretty common that you'll be handed a URL and need to be able to, act on it, knowing what the semantics of that URL are. And if you have to do a lookup every time to be like, okay, hey, look up that URL and tell me what that thing is, that's a pretty bad performance hit. So self-describing URLs would be extremely valuable in our design. Now, I originally didn't do it this way because it means that your key names are going to be repeating the schema URL or schema identifier throughout the database, so it's less space efficient. But frankly, I'm less concerned about that than I am about having self-describing URLs. The consequence of this, of course, is that the blobs table will still be there, and so you will be able to do that lookup, which will give you the blob pointer. Not inherently interesting, but it'll still be there. You'll also be able to fetch the database identification at that URL right there, which will actually tell you where the blob's feed key is. Now to do this, we need to rework how our schemas are designed a little bit, because we're basically enforcing a system in which when we are addressing the data, it's going to be b.sub schema domain .sub schema ID .get key. So there'll be regularity in terms of schema domain, schema ID key. which means we're not using straight URLs for our schemas anymore. So we'll have to cook up some kind of process for how you find schemas, but they don't necessarily have to be fetchable off the internet. Or at least certainly not off the URL. So let's start by rearranging our database schemas around this. And we're going to need to think about how we're speccing our schema definitions to have these kind of identifiers. Do I plan to have schema versioning? So it's a requirement in this system that anybody that creates a schema cannot create backwards incompatible changes. If you do, that would be a different schema. So if we needed to make backwards incompatible changes to posts, that would be post-v2. That doesn't mean you can't add entries, but if I were to add, let's say, after this is deployed, a topic field, well, what I can't do is I can't make that required, because existing data records out there won't have it. So you can't break backwards compatibility with your schema definitions. If you do, it's a new schema. The fact that data is identified so strongly by their schemas suggests that you're really going to be only, like when you're creating new schemas, you're basically creating a new application space. So it shouldn't be a common thing. It's always an option, it's there. It's very important that it's there for people to create new schemas and new application spaces, but it's a bit like XMPP. You are very explicit about each short, set of schemas and standards you're using. When you're in a system that has no data boundary at the server level, so there's no walled gardens, your boundaries of your network become schema compatibility. And so it's very important to be very strict and clear about how your data schemas work. Otherwise, it's going to be a mess. So I'm going to use this in our schemas to identify them. Have I thought about different clients for different kinds of content, like how Instagram is basically the same database as Facebook, but different clients? I'm gonna get some more coffee and then I'll answer. So I'm not sure you can accurately say that Instagram and Facebook are using the same database. They're using the same company, and that's all we really know. Now maybe CS, you have some insight on the internals of this, but let's get to the meat of the actual question, which is basically how do we have flexibility in the applications on this network? How do you have an Instagram and a Twitter clone of each kind of form type side by side? So it's going to depend on how we build out the schemas to some degree. We could make a generic schema for just any kind of post and then allow the schema to sub-specify details. It's also entirely possible for us to create what you might consider extension points. Something like that, where we don't actually define anything about it other than it's an object, and then allow people to put whatever they want there. The question you have to ask around something like that is whether or not you're introducing ambiguity. If I post something that is meant to be in a part of like an Instagram experience, and other people are experiencing it like Twitter, are we actually serving users by doing that? Or will it be a weird and confusing mismatch of expectations? There's no hard yes or no on those questions. It's going to be something we have to feel out. But those are the kind of considerations you have to bear in mind. I'm sort of the inclination that it's not super valuable to have I'm of the inclination it's not super valuable to have the single post type be reused in lots of different ways. I don't know if I think it's super valuable to have somebody using something that feels like Instagram interacting with the same thing that feels like Twitter. They're very different modalities. One of them is super image focused. One of them is super text focused. I think they should be a part of the same network, hands down. I think the network should support both. Whether they ought to cross-interact, maybe. Of course, it's not, for whatever reason, people like having different apps for different mental spaces. I think that's true. And I think it has lots of different effects. I mean, sometimes the apps end up translating to a lot of different things where you have, within every network, there's embedded into it like the kind of people that are there and the culture of the community and things like that, who you're connected with, what kind of content tends to surface, in addition to the kind of mode of interaction. So, our goal isn't necessarily to set up a situation where everybody is unified. In fact, I think that would be, or it's just like one kind of logical community or one logical interaction model or anything like that. The goal is to ensure that all possibilities, or as many possibilities, can be served while simultaneously always having total clarity about what is being attempted. Because ambiguity is really problematic for people. That hurts people's ability to use the software. So let me hit some of these responses and questions here. Sarapath saying, or Alexander saying that he likes the schema JSON schema approach. I'm glad you like it. I'm pretty excited about it. Also glad you like the music. Music is my brother's album. I gotta plug it always. That's the only reason I can play it, because I know I won't get a copyright strike because it's his. But it turns out that it's pretty good too, so let me share it. It's called Traffic, and his band is called Dead Wrong. Okay, let's see here. Bevins was trying to link to the Ink and Switch Cambria project, but the comments keep getting black holed. It's a good resource for schema versioning. I'll get back to you, Dean, in a second. So Bevins, YouTube's moderation is that you're not allowed, if you're not me, to put links in the chat because it's a common spam problem. So sorry about that. But easy to Google. So Cambria is an interesting project. Basically, what Cambria is a data munging solution. Data munging is you have data in one format, one schema, and you need it to be in another schema. It's really common for anybody that's involved in data science, to be sure, to do a lot of data munging. And their idea, which they use some pretty kind of high-level mathy concepts to describe, talking about lenses and things, is basically to do munging at runtime, to define these transformers that, upon read, can transform to a destination format. I think it's a neat idea. I don't know if it's something that we need to embed into the project right now. Most of the tooling that's being introduced in CTZN is actually geared towards helping automate the process of schema compliance or spec compliance. And this is something that if you read some of the creator of the Diaspora did this long post talking about his criticisms about ActivityPub, where he talked a lot about this, about like the ambiguities in the spec and how that's a really challenging thing. And my personal experience mirrors that. When I worked on Secure Scuttlebutt, we were very YOLO about schemas, and what we found was that was just not the right way to do it. If you just allow any kind of JSON object, and yeah, the software will figure it out, the software will not figure it out. And it becomes the kind of thing where everybody's afraid to make changes to the schema because they don't know what effects it will have. So I've given this a lot of thought. I've varied in my positions from YOLO to we should just always expect to do data munging to this right here, where it's a very strict and enforced schema. And I think having a very strictly enforced schema is going to be the best for everybody. It does mean that whoever is the organizations maintaining those schemas, are controlling a lot. But if anybody's able to introduce their own schemas, you have an exit flow for people to innovate. So Dean is asking, would this be similar to ActivityPub? I guess in some senses, but I'm familiar with the high levels of ActivityPub and differ on a lot of the thinking. Again, they have a highly general data model that's RDF based, and it has lots of kind of subclasses and types and things, and I'm just not about that. I've just fussed with this too long to feel like anything other than a very clear and concise API is a benefit. There are ways that we can introduce extension points if we are pretty sure we need them, but I think the reality is that coming to a social consensus about data schema design is just enormously complicated. And if you introduce a system in which you have, indexes or feeds of data that could be coming out with basically unpredictable output, then building applications ends up being a terrible drag. So you really kind of have to be less liberal in what, or more kind of conservative in what you accept, I think, for this to work well. I'm not, there's that whole be conservative in what you create and liberal in what you accept. In some situations that could work, but I don't think that's the case for actual machine data. I feel like I'm about as well, had enough history to take this perspective. I mean, I've dove into a lot of different stuff. I dove heavily into RDF multiple times and did a really big push on it last year. And ultimately, I just felt like, it doesn't solve the right problems. CTZN is for conservatives. So if you run your own app and define your own schemas, no problem. The thing that's important is that the schemas will be clear. People will know. You'll have to register a domain for those schemas. Or, you could not, but somebody else could take it. It's always good if the schema is able to have a URL that people can just go to quickly find the schema. At the end of the day, all that really matters is that we have a somewhat of agreed idea about, like, okay, citizen.network/follow maps to this thing right here. Whether that's fetched by HTTP or not doesn't really matter. So you could, not register the domain, but I think it's wise to. But the system, the replication layer is completely ambivalent about the schemas. And this is one of the things I talked about in the thread, and I've talked about in the past. I'm inclined to hope and believe that the servers will be able to have new schemas installed on them, so that not only can you have your own schemas, but you don't even need to set up a server somewhere to do so, which would allow users to install new use cases into their kind of home server. Will your app live on a hyperdrive? It could. Definitely could. It doesn't have to, but it could. We're going to try to practice front-end and back-end separation with the design across the stack, so that even if this is something that we kind of decided on in the last stream, I was kicking it around and then I got just a positive response from folks in the chat, where basically it's looking like we're going to do the citizen server nodes, or the homes for people, are going to be basically very generic. They're not going to have a UI. They're going to act just more as backends. And then applications will talk to those backends. So you'll have a separation from front end and back end, which, as I talked about in the Twitter thread last night, there's a lot of advantages to doing that. So to deal with multi-writer currently, this is why we're using server nodes. You can certainly maintain your own user database on your own device, make the writes there and sync it up to the server, but then you won't have a multi-writer solution. And as everybody knows, multi-writer is being worked on by multiple different people. Different approaches are being worked on. The core team is working on an approach as well, but that's going to take some time to get out. So in the meantime, just having the server, act as a manager of your keys is a decent solution to dealing with access from multiple devices. Plus, because it'll be served over HTTP, you'll be able to access it from, all browsers. So until we have multi-writer, if you're particularly concerned about key ownership, which I think is a good thing to be concerned about, it's one of the things I believe would be really great, is if everybody maintained private keys, because it's an important part of the authority model. You could always set up your own home node. And hopefully that will be relatively easy to do. And in fact, you should be able to set up your own home node, but then use somebody else's server to act as like your aggregator. So really your home server could just be managing your keys. Now you'd have to find a way to send puts and things to that server, so that'll take some thinking, but certainly doable. Oh, you're thinking about not having to use the server at all. I imagine we'll be able to get architectures like you're talking about. In theory, it should be possible to interact with the Citizen network without using any server at all, because it's all the data is being stored on Hypercore. So it should be possible to interact in a pure peer-to-peer fashion. But if you do that, you're just going to have to handle aggregation and things on your own. But for instance, if we depending on what all we put into a server's public database, it's storing its secondary indexes there. So you should be able to actually write applications that are only interacting with the hyperdata and gaining the benefit of the produced indexes by the server. And the less business logic we have in the server, the better, because that means more of it can run purely on the hypermesh. So you're asking if you run your email server and you're offline, where your citizen, node, can other users or nodes in this form cache data for me so I receive it when I'm back? So far at the moment, the plan is for Citizen's network to be entirely pull based. where basically interactions are handled by writing entries into your user database, and then other users receive those interactions by watching your databases and pulling the information into their local caches. So in that design, basically you could think of it like everybody's maintaining, if you're thinking about it in an email metaphor, it's like everybody's maintaining an outbox for you. So yes, those interactions that are waiting for you should remain online even though that you are not. And then when you come online, you fetch them. We'll see how well that works. But if we can avoid any kind of push mechanic, I think things will work better. CS says, I wonder if there could be a citizen in a box, kind of like Cobox. Yeah, I think there could be. Okay, so we need to rework how we're addressing our schemas here. We're not going to be fetching them over the network anymore. Kind of nicer to look at, not having to put those URLs for the schema. Alright, now let's figure out our new table layout. I'm thinking it should be this. So we're going to put an underscore in front of the fixed items, and then the rest of it is going to be this kind of free form, so to speak, of the schema domain, schema name, and then the individual records. Now, do we need... We may at some point want to encode metadata. similar to what's going on here. In fact, at some point we may want to actually encode the schema itself in the database, similar to that, so that you can fetch the schema definition there, but we're not there yet. So it'll look more like that, and then we get a table by the IDs instead. Table definitions are gone. So that's what our table layout will look like now. I think the cat one's in. I haven't played with her yet today, so I may have to do that soon. Pay the kit tax. Kitty. She's my little co-worker. Maybe this should be the stream. Just me petting cats. I think people would watch. You gonna let me work? Hey, Math. Say hi to Kit. You gonna let me work now? Could be a cookie. CS asks if I'm watching any good shows lately. I hear Cobra Kai is good. Oh yeah, she wants to play. Little gremlin. You know what I recently got into that I really enjoyed that nobody talks about is Billions. I thought Billions was super good. And it's apparently not over yet. So big recommendation on Billions. I hear Cobra Kai is good. I haven't seen it yet. Also, I'm super into The Expanse. I'm enjoying The Expanse a lot. Anybody else seen anything good? We do need season 3 of Succession. Succession is awesome. I love Succession. So all this code can go. don't need to maintain that anymore, which means that get table will no longer be async. That's nice. Yeah, play with this cat. One sec. I can always tell what Kit wants. She will go up to, like just now I knew she wanted to play because she went up to the toy and just kind of, hey, this would be fun. Or if she starts meowing at me and I don't know what it is, I'll stand up and she'll lead me where she wants me to. So she'll lead me to her food dish, or if she wants a can of wet food, she'll lead me into the kitchen. Smart cat. I've had to start locking her out of the bedroom at night because she wakes me up so much, and she makes a ruckus. A damn ruckus outside the door. I had to get earplugs and I turned on all my fans. It's that bad. Ridiculous. I know it's ridiculous that I'm pausing the stream to play with her, but if I don't, she'll bother me until I do, so this is happening whether I like it or not. Okay. Hopefully that's enough. Alright, so we got the ID, so we want to do this. We want to split the ID. And then we'll set the B to sub at the domain, and then sub at the name. That should be it for that. Now let's just go through all of our get tables and get rid of the awaits, because that's no longer async. And I gotta update the README. Do that later. Does the blob setup need to be async? Yeah. And that's third-party dependency. And we need to add the schema setups. No Golang version of Hypercore yet. But you know, the problem you have there, I'll tell you how you can fix it. Should use JavaScript. Does that work? Is that cool? Okay, so we're going to need to update our URL construction and stuff still, but let's run the test real quick and see where we're at. Schemas.put is not a function. That should be set. Yeah, obviously I'm just joking. Everything timing out. So that all seems to be working. So where are we timing out? You did miss a kid cameo. That's why you gotta come in early. Kid cameos come fast and they're out. She could probably make another appearance. She's skulking right now. Okay, so setup is not completing. Oh, wait a minute. And Math would be the one you'd want to talk to if you're making a Go implementation of Hypercore. Math, really what happens is that somebody does come to you and then you say, okay, here's what you do. Use JavaScript. Is that funny? Come on, that's funny, right? Ta-da! Okay, looks like we're getting hung up in the database setup step. I feel like everybody watching me do the putting console.logs in various places in my code to debug, it's like doing something that everybody does but nobody wants to admit to. Okay. You know that meme of the guy, the two astronauts with a gun? Wait, it's all console.logs? Always has been. So what on earth is failing here? Get table. Is it like throwing an exception and I'm not seeing it? Wouldn't an exception get dumped out somewhere? I've tried to use the private props at JS, and I do agree. Okay, wow, why is that error getting swallowed? Let's answer that question. The syntax is a little iffy, but actually the problem I've had is just it's not well supported yet. So I've tried to use it in the past and just couldn't use it on the engines I was on. Okay, why on earth would errors be swallowed? So that should bubble all the way up to here. That's why errors are swallowed. You hack! There we go. I tweeted some joke about the, JS adding hashtags. Seems a bit much, but, you know. Languages do have to evolve. Right, that's my problem right there. You know, I don't think I... No, I should. No. I don't need to. Okay. I have never met a real coder. I'm certainly not going to start being one. If you're a real coder, do you have to have a neck beard? And what about a fedora? This one time I hadn't shaved for a while, and my sister was like, I don't even know if she knew about the neck beard being, but she's like, oh, you got a neck beard going there. That was the day I knew I needed to clean up. That's what it is. The beard gatekeeper. The neck beard gatekeeping. Just gotta get a Sharpie. Alright. So we're getting something that's trying to parse the schema URL. Right there. All right, so now time to do our URL construction updates here. I'm going to fix this the wrong way first, and then we'll fix it the right way. Okay. So we have gotten step 1 of rearranging our Hyper-V database here. Okay. So now we got to talk about actually using hyper URLs for data as opposed to HTTP. All right, Andrew, another kit cameo for you. Gotta give the kitty kisses. Ah! She still wants to play a little bit. I'm gonna grab coffee and play with her a little bit more. So now we're talking about moving to hyper URLs to identify data. There's going to be a couple of places where we need to do translation from, like, yeah, because the hyper URL won't encode the username. It'll encode their public key for their database. So we're going to need to do, bits where we're translating to the username. It's also sort of interesting to think, like, whether or not we ought to encode more than just the hyper URL. And like a comment, like when it's saying what the subject of the comment is, should it be encoding both the hyper and the HTTP URL, or should it encode both the hyper URL but also like the username or the user ID? User IDs also need some love because currently they're not global, they're per instance. Certainly on the follow record, let's open that up. So on the follow record, we definitely want to encode both the hyper URL and the DNS-based ID of the user, because that's a part of being able to deal with users rehoming or swapping out their keys. So that's something we will need to do. But there's going to be some questions here, like we're always going to need to do things like when you land at a URL that's an HTTP URL, like looking at phrasey/posts/1, for example, we need to translate that to the actual hyper URL so we can fetch content and things. So there's that factor to consider. Now our current URL structure is username. That's correct, Andrew. The reasoning for hyper URLs is in case the user ID gets remapped, the links are still valid, which I call rehoming. So if you think of your identity being your home and you rehome, how do we deal with that? If your pub key gets swapped out, I think what we're going to do is have a sort of resumption protocol where you don't reconstruct the old database, but you sort of like point to the old database. So then those old URLs are still valid. The old database continues to exist in its previous form, and etc. Of course, that's a little challenging because it means a given user could end up having lots of databases that need to be swarmed. So we'll have to feel that out as we go. Let me work. But here's the current scheme. It's username, data, schema ID, key. So p crazy data citizen.network host 1. That's the HTTP scheme. If we go through with this swapping out to having a client application that's separate from the backend application, that'll become more like this. So are there historical versions of the user ID maintained? I don't, it's not been implemented yet, so it could be. Of course, another way we could address this right here is something more like that. And I'm kind of thinking that user IDs ought to be in that kind of email form. So we know what our hyper URLs look like. They look like this. So that's for sure. And user IDs really ought to be name at domain. So the question is, really for any URL that's on HTTP, we need it to translate to the hyper URL and then fetch information accordingly. And I'm somewhat inclined to say that the HTTP URLs shouldn't have a structure enforced. That basically servers, that's not specified, but servers will need to respond with information to do the hyper mapping. So if I do a get and this is the schema that my server is using, it should return a JSON object of the data and include in it the hyper information. something else to consider is that if I am using this app and I link to somebody's post and it looks like this, I'll be linking the HTTP URL. So whenever links are being done, when the record is being written, there may be situations where before writing you want to translate to the hyper URL. For a post that's like this, check out this terrible post by Paul. It's more of a Twitter style for our V1, but it's going to evolve pretty quickly. So in some ways it's kind of hard to say precisely what the interaction model will be because it will evolve. But the main thing that we're doing at first is Twitter style. I know that ain't your vibe, Math, but so anyway, if I did a post like this and then that somehow gets extracted to have something like embeds and, you know, type link URL like that, and that's an URL we actually don't need to translate to the hyper URL for this, because if that 404s at some point, not a big deal. That's more of a kind of a UI interaction thing. But if we're talking about a comment, that would be a problem. That needs to be translated. And then the question we should ask is like, should it be like this? Reddit style would go nicely with the server community paradigm. Yeah. I fully expect that Reddit style to show up at some point, but I think we should hit Twitter first. Cat wants out. The world needs a decentralized Reddit. Yeah, they do exist. There's Aether. Why not just save the hyper URL for comments? That's kind of what I'm debating. My gut says that that's sufficient. I'm trying to think about whether or not there'd be any downside to doing it that way. I don't think there would be. The design is sufficiently flexible. Yeah, I mean, it's flexible enough that there's no question that a Reddit style of database can be maintained, and then really the question is just whether or not we need whether or not it could be so flexible that somebody could cook up the schemas on their own, publish those definitions, and then install them onto the user's server. So that the server the hosting node doesn't need to have any custom logic to support new applications. And if we could pull that off, this thing could do anything. But that's kind of that's some Omega thinking right there. Might get into boiling the ocean if we try to go so general that users can install new schemas. But it's definitely something I'm keeping an eye on. All right. So let's start from here and work our way through. So on a post.get, see, there's things like this that we got to contend with, like parsing a URL and it's pulling out the username and that's not right and things. So all of our code around parsing URLs and constructing URLs needs to get updated here. It's just kind of a ball here I'm trying to break down in my brain here. Well, Matthias, it's certainly easier than some of the other approaches we tried in the past. I'll say that. But ideally, schema, you shouldn't be defining schemas a whole lot. I would bet money that the URL parser will choke on hyper URLs, but let's find out. It didn't. That's nice. So this is correct for the entry URL stuff. And the user URL stuff will need to be updated as well. And I'm wondering, like, do we want to use user URLs or user IDs? So now we get to go through and tediously update all these pieces. So here's an interesting one here. Our votes index stores a list of hyper URLs for the upvotes themselves. But we want to translate that to the upvoters and downvoters themselves, which means we will have to do a public key translation every time. We have to look up for the public key what is their user ID. And in some cases, we might not know it. No, we should know it if it's in our index. We could just store that translation table in memory. But would that be a good idea? How many users would we be talking about here? Let's say 1 million. We're talking about a string that's 64 characters long, so could store them in buffer form to compress it a little bit, but then you gotta keep on, so we'll keep it in the string form. And then the usernames, which will probably on average be, let's say, 10 characters. And if there's 1 million of them, that'd be 70 megabytes for 1 million users. And 72 kilobytes for 1,000 users. So we're weighing, 74 bytes per user versus having to do a database lookup every time we want to translate a public key to a user ID. And actually the user IDs would be larger than 10 characters because they'd include the origin, so it actually would be 64 plus more like 20. So 84 kilobytes per, or 84 bytes per user. I mean, 80 megs of memory for something like that. 1 million users is not outside of the potential scaling destination that we want, and have it have 80 megs of memory dedicated just to that. I don't think that's a winner. We got more problems than just that, though. Because if we want to be able to quickly look up a user ID for a given public key, we're going to need to have a secondary index for it. Because our user record doesn't index against it. Indeed. So I think we're going to need to update that. That's a big old pain in the butt. We also need to update all the kinds of places where we're using username and switch that to user ID. Oh, database surgery. I guess this isn't really database surgery, but database architecture. I'd be surprised if we'll get to the secondary indexing work today, because this is going to be a fair amount of work. So, something else that we have to think about here is that currently the user records being used suppose we did want to have this secondary index to map user yeah, if we want to have a secondary index to map keys to user IDs, it actually needs to cover more than just the current server. Which I think maybe we put that in the private user database. So then whenever you're trying to access the records for a different database, you look at their public server database. Yeah, so I think we got to set up a secondary index of user key to user ID maps. All right, so that would be user DB index. Not often, but every once in a while, I'm like, why do I do this to myself? Why do I build this kind of software? Just use Postgre. It'd be so much easier that way. Just use Twitter. Why bother with decentralization? This is a whole thing. Who wants to deal with a whole thing? This new index is to translate for a given pub key to the user ID. I need to be able to do reverse lookups. And I don't want to do it by having to read the whole users table and it's doing a scan and filter. It's already bad enough. I mean, this is a translation that needs to happen really quickly. To give an example, what prompted me even thinking about this was we have this right here, get votes for subject, right? And so I need to be able to get the upvoter user IDs. And the votes index, what it stores is the URLs of the upvotes and the downvotes. Which it really needs to do, because when it's doing its indexing, it's watching for new votes and just storing the URL. And whenever that data changes, it needs to be able to find the old record and remove it. So I need to be able to translate from a given hyper URL to the user ID. Yeah, they're hyper URLs. Yep. So what does change look like? I really need to have a schema around changes, but this is all going to change in the future anyway, so. So what information do we need? We need it to include we need to know the old, I think in every case, we need to know what the old user DB was and the old user ID is optional. Because we just need to be able to look up by that. I guess I could actually now, one problem we have here is dealing with a pub key change. Yeah, because there's two possible changes here. It's that either the public key is changing or the URL is changing. If we're only handling when the database, no, if we're only handling when the user URL changes, that's easy. We just put like that. But if it's the database URL is changing, we need to delete the old one. Let's include a facility for it. Hey, Kai. Happy Friday to you too as well. Glad to have you on. So, I don't know if there's a way around this, Andrew. I could be wrong, and we can, explore what other options there are here. I also don't know if this needs to be in a transaction, but it's fine. But I'm pretty sure that, the situation we're setting up is that data is addressed like this. So we need to be able to translate from the pub key to the user ID. The votes situation is a perfect example of this. We have this index of their upvote and downvote URLs, which is a bunch of hyper URLs. But what I need the API to output is a list of the user IDs that did the upvotes and the downvotes. And part of the reason for this is that, like, the database indexes, like, let's say I'm given the hyper URL for, it just kind of is baked into how we're addressing things. Like, let's look at the users DB here. The users DB is a map, which currently we're setting by username, but we'll eventually set by user ID. So we got to choose one or the other. We're either mapping it to the user ID or the pub key. I don't know if we can bet on using one or the other always. So we need a way to go to translate from one or the other always. And I'm betting that we're going to want to be using the user IDs as much as possible, and then just internally every once in a while doing this translation like I'm speccing here. That's the bet I'm going with. We're going to have a lot of user ID reworking to do because I'm using usernames everywhere, and that can't persist. I use user IDs instead. So now over here, Well, this whole thing is going to just be a long time. I mean, stepping through each piece of code and updating it, so it may not be the most interesting thing to watch, but don't take that as any brush off. Feel free to stick with me here, but yeah, that's what we're up for now. Cool, cool. One API down. Oh. Indeed. Thank you. Yeah, it's been an interesting experience doing, you know, streaming while I work. It is a little, just a little bit, you know, distracting, but not as bad as I thought. And the upside is way higher, so. Okay. Thank you for winning the Mental Image Olympics. No, this is great. I have no complaints at all. In fact, after starting to do this, it's going to be hard to do anything otherwise. Okay, so if we're given a user ID, we need to look up the database URL. Which would actually be the public server that would do that for us. Actually, it's kind of beyond just an individual public server. I'm going to change our follows index to store user IDs as opposed to user URLs. This is going to be such a... I'll be shocked if we manage to get all this back into a working state by at the end of the day. So the follows index is a secondary index. Doesn't really matter whether or not we're doing the follow or DNS ID or the pub keys. Oh, but we should give some more thought to this because now we're in the zone of the follows schema, which needs to be updated. All right, I'm gonna get a soda real quick. So let's look at this follow schema. Really? Was that yesterday you were talking about? Update about Blue Sky? Yeah, yesterday, right? Yeah, I don't want to speak out of turn, but I am involved. I know some of the folks that are involved in it, and I'm going to be submitting a proposal. I'll be submitting what we're doing with Citizen. No, what they're looking to do actually is to produce a organization that kind of exists outside of Twitter, the Blue Sky organization, which, you know, I suppose they'll probably get funding to it by some means. But they're looking for it to be sort of cross-industry and have stakeholders that are not just Twitter. And they... it'll be interesting. You know, what I'm going to propose to them is basically, hey, here's what we're doing with Citizen. I think we're onto some good stuff. But I think it's possible that their goals are actually better aligned with just adopting ActivityPub, to be honest, based on some of the things I've read about what they're working on. So I'm also going to say that to them. Like, look, here's Citizen. I think we're doing something cool here. Would love to be a part of what y'all are doing with it, but I think there's a real good chance that what you're really interested in doing is just using ActivityPub. Based on my read of their proposals and or their kind of documentation. So we'll see what happens. Yeah, like Twitter would just be an ActivityPub server. It would be a popular one, yet to be sure. So this has become such a common pattern that I'm going to factor that out. Now our follows index doesn't really matter, but I think we'll use the user ID as the key. Yeah. I gotta decide if I want to do camel case on user ID. I really probably should. Alright. Okay, that's followers. I have some complicated feelings about what y'all are talking about with Mastodon, but I kind of want to stay focused. But ask me another time and I'll give my rant about it. Broadly speaking, I'm not I'm not against moderation. And my thinking tends to be centered around making authority models that are better than before, not removing authority. There's a talk I recorded that'll be airing not this Sunday but next that's all about this. So I would just say, I imagine there will be folks that are kind of like, I don't know what he's talking about here. Wait to see that talk, and then you'll see a little bit more about my feelings about this. On to posts. Let's see if all my imports are okay. I have it like unlisted on YouTube, and I would love to just like share the link with y'all, but I feel like that'd be kind of unkind to Fosdem, which is who it is that I recorded it for. You know, they're airing the thing, and it feels kind of wrong to, you know, quote unquote air the talk before they. I don't know, would that be messed up? Well, alright. Kai, you think that'd be messed up? Okay. In that case, I'll wait. Y'all ain't dying for it anyway. Fair enough. All right. Yeah, I just like to share, you know, the content of it. It's a lot about what we're doing here and how I think about the questions that we're dealing with. It's tough to put together a talk and have to sit on it. Hey, Stefan, you're late, but always welcome to join whenever you feel it. No, so Stefan, we're doing a whole lot of database reworking to sort of solve some of the problems around being in a distributed context. So switching from usernames to user IDs, which will look like email addresses, and switching all the data links to hyper URLs. So that's requiring a fairly large chunk of work on the internals of the database. And I'm just kind of going through and one at a time. Sounds good. Okay, that's posts handled. That's profiles handled. Nothing on users. And finally, votes. And that should be votes. So now we need to update our users management to be working off of user IDs instead of user names. Okay. Well, let's see what kind of a nightmare we're in for when I try to run the post test. And we're off to the races. Update user DB index is wrong. I need to update. Change my music real quick. All right, let's see here. Let's take a look at our schema real quick, make sure that's defined correctly. Looks right. So this thing is complaining that we're not passing in an object. There's a problem. User ID is wrong because I didn't update the camel case. It should be an object. It's saying type. Okay, let's jump over to our schemas code and see what's happening here. How's that happening? Line 135. Oh, I'm not setting a key. That would do it. Okay. Let's do a quick look around for any remaining lowercase user IDs. Okay. Failing the email validation, so let's take a look at that. So it seems to think that user ID doesn't like that as an email. If it doesn't like that, then the email format is not going to work for us. Yeesh. Let's see here. I think we've got to be pretty open in what we accept here. So like that. But not star, it should be. There should always be a character. Okay. So now we're getting a user database not found, not a shocking turn of events. Let's find out what's triggering it. It says line 28 of the posts test. Okay, so the post.create. So our auth is failing to set the user ID. Yep. We botched that. Okay, and we'll need to update on that. So hang on. Back over in our posts API, we'll remove that console.log. And then we gotta update our tests to be using user IDs. Tests are passing. At least one of them. Let's take a look at what some of our data looks like. Okay, well, that's in a good state. The constructed URLs are getting some double slashes in there, so let's look into that. What's up, kitty cat? She's attacking me. Come on, kitty. Ow! Ow! Cat is attacking me. Can't neglect her much longer. Okay, that fixed that double slash problem. Let me deal with the cat. What do you want, huh? Huh? What do you want? You know what you want? What's up? You wanna play more? Okay. This time she wanted food. She wanted wet food. Okay, let's look at that data a little bit more, spot check everything. Okay, a couple of problems. Mainly, the biggest problem is that our URLs constructed for the posts are wrong. Yeah. So let's jump into that. Ah, there it is. That should be like that. Okay, so that fixes that. Okay, that looks roughly right. Anything else I want to spot check in the posts tests? Nope. All right, let's try the comments. All right, that's gonna fail because I gotta update my user IDs. Okay, line 83. Can't read property key of undefined, which makes me think that the thread is returning undefined. Yeah. It's coming out empty. So let's see here. Let's examine some of our data real quick, see if any indicators show there. That all looks correct. Yep. Let's look at one of the comments that are getted. Okay, that looks correct. So it's just get thread that's failing. Probably means something wrong with our indexer. Okay, so the indexer seems to be working correctly. Okay, so it's fetch indexed comments that's failing. Okay. So parse entry URL failed. And it's failing because it doesn't set the origin. I imagine that's because it doesn't understand hyper URLs. So we fixed that, but fetch user ID is failing. Because I'm doing that again. There we go. Okay, let's take a look at that thread output and make sure that looks correct. Subject URL is right. URL is right. Author is right. I want to have the author start to return the DB URL. I'm really close to the mic, sorry if I'm sounding louder. Okay, let's take a look at the replies real quick. That all looks correct. And finally, let's just look at the thread 2 real fast. Okay. So comments are good. Next up, let's hit follows. Okay. So following, this will be interesting. Let's start by taking a look at the profiles output. Okay. So we need to modify that a little bit. The profiles API should give us a combination of things. It should give us the, I think it should give us the database URL and the user ID. Okay, but it didn't do it. Why not? Oh wait, DB URL is not defined. Okay. So now in this code here, we're gonna do 2 of them following by user ID, 2 of them followed by DB URL, and then 1 of each. And then we're going to update all of these to use the proper user ID. And we should update our tests. Now let's take a look at some of the output here. Just do a spot check. Okay, so it failed at line 46. So our follows code needs an update. And the failure was should match format URI. Let's take a look at what does it not believe. Let's get a little more info here. Subject ID. Maybe I need to update the follow schema. Huh. It's saying it's failing on subject ID. Maybe that's in the follows index. It is. In subject ID. Okay. Easy fix. Okay, we're getting closer. That failed on line 55 of the tests. Let's get rid of some of those console logs. Did I leave any? I did. Where did I leave that? Right there. So it failed on line 55 of follows. Right there. That should be either DB URL or user ID. Aren't we glad we did automated tests? Oh, I think I changed. How I index follows, didn't I? The key is currently the user ID, that's why. So it's no longer subject URL. Okay, we're making some progress here. Let's take a look at these. Looks correct. Yeah, this all looks good. So let's look at what's failing now. Line 70. So this is failing. Oh. That's a dumb bug. Worst kind of bug is a bug in your tests. Okay, so that's line 81, calling list followers. And subject info, it's fetch user info. And it's coming out empty. So let's see what's going on there. So the follows index Okay, we're getting closer. Line 94 of our tests. Yep. Okay. So that oh, nope, something failed. Line 94. So that takes us now to profiles. Okay, profiles works. Finally votes. This one should work out of the box. Let's find out. No such luck. Ah. There we go. Yeah, good. All tests passing. Now we're going to need to nuke our old database, unfortunately. And let's see what kind of a nightmare we got for the front end. That's an existing bug, known issue. We're going to need to create a user for myself. Okay. All right, now let's start updating some of the front end. We are almost there. What time did we start? Like around noon? Been 3 hours working on this? Take a half second to breathe and see what all is happening in the world. Cool. Got a name drop on The Verge talking about Blue Sky. That's fun. Cool. I imagine I have somebody like Jay to thank for that, because I'm sure that somebody talked to The Verge and they included my name, so that's very nice of them. Okay, let's get into some front end. Everybody's, well, some people like the front end and some people like the back end. Okay, so we're hitting user database not found. So first thing I need to do is look through all of our code here and replace every time we're using username with user ID. And I want to exclude the build files. Okay, that's a start. Still getting a failure. Oh, I love it when it looks like that. Okay, so this is in the feed stuff. So we got a bug in our list home feed code. Okay, screwed up my auth code again. There it is. That's not getting old at all. Okay, it's there now. But we're still getting a failure, it looks like. Yeah. Client.auth.user ID. So maybe our user DBs are not getting loaded properly. Oh, you know what? That's what's going on. Because load user DBs needs to get updated. Yeah. Okay. Making some progress here. dun, 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 dun. Just a tedious process of just going through and updating all this code here. Looking for where the bugs are coming in. Somebody's giving me the not a post error. Pretty sure that's the URL to a post, so let's dig into that. Okay, the posts API. Okay, so my parse entry code is wrong. It needs to be a 3. There we go. Let's try voting. Voting seems to work. Let's try commenting. Oh, I'll bet money that's not going to work. It worked. All right. Glad I didn't actually make that bet with anybody. Okay, that's good. Let's add some more. Actually, let's get the avatar loading. That's good. Now let's create some test users. Okay, obviously we don't want to be doing that because that button's ridiculous, so let's fix that. Let's use the display name. Before we do that, let's jump over to the CSS and turn off the word wrap. Okay, good, and now we'll jump back over to the UI code, and we'll have that show the display name. Okay, and that failed because I need to change the follow button. Okay, so a couple issues involved here. So how are we getting the follows right now? Followers is coming out. That's probably because that needs to be follower IDs. Okay, so that fixed that. Now why doesn't it think I'm following them? Probably because am I following? Okay. Okay, so far so good. Let's log in real fast as Bob. Okay. Looking good. Let's add another user. We are almost there. Uh-oh. That's not right. Okay. I think we've finally done it. Okay. Haha! We made it. That was brutal. Look at that diff. After an adventure like that, I don't know if I'm going to be able to dive into, I don't know if I'm going to be able to dive into doing, the secondary indexing today. I may save that for tomorrow. Yeah, just doing a spot check, making sure nothing stands out as odd. How fast is the indexing going to be once you get like 2,000 users? I don't know. At some point, we're going to have to run some benchmarks and see how well this thing is scaling. Well, that was an adventure. Oh boy. Oh. Yeah, I think that's going to be a wrap on a Friday for me. But that's a good chunk right there, so a lot more longevity into the system that we just designed, we now have user IDs that are global, as opposed to locked into the current host. Our URLs are now much better in terms of how the data is internally organized. So now we're just going to need to jump into the secondary indexing so that then data coming from other sources can be properly processed. And once that's in place, we'll probably, or while we're doing it, we'll probably implement things like notifications. Not looking forward to that. That's hard work. Doing notifications correctly so that like you don't get double notifications and shit. Oof. Oof. Big oof. And then you gotta factor in things like whether or not somebody's muted. Big oof. No, not using the web notification API, just like this UI right here, you know, in app. Notifications will be tough. Not looking forward to that. But comes with the territory. All right. Well, thanks y'all for joining. A little more time. Does anybody have any more questions or anything they want to talk about before we call it a day? Take that as a no. Well, have a wonderful rest of your Fridays, everybody. And we'll see how I'm feeling tomorrow. You know, it's been a pretty big burn this week. So I don't know if I'm going to... I'll find out tomorrow, but I don't know how much juice I'll have. Worst case, very worst case, we'll do another stream on Monday. I would bet money sooner, but you never know. Okay. Have a great rest of your day. Catch you all online. See you next time.